I felt the betrayal like a crack running through my chest, an agonizing splinter that somehow worsened each time I breathed. Every memory of us, every whispered promise, felt tainted now, infected by the ugly truth that I'd uncovered. I replayed the moment over and over, trying to find some hint that I could have seen it coming. Something that might explain the way he slipped into someone else's arms with the ease of a man simply switching jackets. But there was nothing. He'd been my muse, my partner, my constant. Or so I thought. After that discovery, I couldn't look at my art, couldn't paint, couldn't sculpt. Everything was hollow, the colors seemed dim, the forms empty. My studio, once a sanctuary, became a prison lined with memories. Paintings we had laughed over. Clay sculptures we had worked on together. Even the paint-splattered floor all carried some piece of him. How many nights had we spent here, lost in creativity, me pouring my heart out on canvas while he read his favorite books. Our silences, comfortable and deep, felt like a lie, all of it. And then slowly an idea began to grow, like a single seed sprouting in the aftermath of a forest fire. I was still a creator, an artist. That much hadn't changed. My art had always come from my emotions, and if the only thing I felt now was rage, then rage would be my muse. I would use this pain, twist it, mold it into something that could finally lift the weight off my chest. The betrayal would become the very tool I used to set myself free. The concept was simple, stark, brutal, exactly how the truth had hit me. Each piece would be a reflection of our relationship, starting with the innocence, the early passion, building through trust and intimacy, and ending with the dark, disfigured wreckage left behind. I poured myself into it, every ounce of anger, sorrow, and disgust. I'd often wake up in the middle of the night, thoughts swirling, and head straight to the studio, working feverishly until dawn. The sleep deprivation, the constant hammering away at this project, it became an obsession. And with each piece I felt the pain ease just a little. One of the first pieces I created was a mixed media painting, an abstract swirl of bright colors merging into deeper, darker shades, then finally disintegrating into a chaotic mess of broken glass and black paint splatters. I called it Prelude to Ruin, and it spoke of the passion that once bound us, a love that seemed boundless, only to reveal hidden fractures underneath. Next came a sculpture, a delicate form of two intertwined bodies, their limbs tangling together in a desperate, strained embrace. The closer one looked, the more the details emerged. Cracks along their arms, pieces missing from their torsos, their faces frozen in a scream only visible from certain angles. I named it Erosion. Piece by piece I catalogued our journey, turning each memory, each betrayal into art. The lies, the secrets, his guilt, all bared for the world to see. I began to work feverishly, ignoring phone calls, isolating myself from friends, pouring my heart out onto canvas and into metal and clay. My life became a whirlwind of expression and exhaustion. And with each new piece I could feel the weight of him, of us, lifting. Then the opportunity came. A gallery in Berlin was looking for new artists to feature. Someone raw, provocative, willing to challenge conventions. I sent in photos of my work and a brief explanation of the collection, that it was a visual exploration of betrayal and rebirth. They accepted it within days. When I saw the gallery space for the first time, my breath caught. It was perfect, stark white walls and open spaces. A blank slate upon which I could showcase the rawness of what I'd been through. The opening night was a blur. People drifted from piece to piece, murmuring, reflecting, some of them visibly moved, others stunned into silence. They didn't know the details, only that it was a chronicle of betrayal, and that seemed to resonate deeply. I overheard snatches of conversations, people sharing their own stories of heartbreak and trust broken, their voices heavy with empathy. It felt surreal watching strangers feel what I had felt, seeing my pain mirrored back to me in their faces. And then, a month into the exhibition, it happened. I was standing near the back, talking with a journalist who was writing an article about the raw emotion in my work, when I saw him. I froze, the glass of wine in my hand suddenly heavy. He had come alone, looking uncertain, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. For a brief second, I thought he might turn and leave, but instead, he continued forward, his expression unreadable as he took in the pieces around him. He stopped in front of Prelude to Ruin, studying the tangled colors, the broken glass, the chaotic descent into darkness. From where I stood, I could see his face, and for the first time he looked vulnerable, almost haunted. Then he moved to Erosion, tracing his fingers over the fractured bodies, the cracks I had sculpted with such furious precision. I wondered if he recognized himself in those figures, if he understood the pain they encapsulated. As he continued through the gallery, stopping at each piece, I could almost feel the questions radiating off him. But he didn't turn to look at me again, and I remained in the shadows, watching him confront the raw, visceral truth of what he'd done to us. It was a silent conversation, one I had already had countless times in my own head, but here in this space, he couldn't deny it, couldn't escape it. My art had trapped him as he had once trapped me. When he finally reached the last piece, a larger-than-life painting I had simply titled Closure, he stood there for a long time motionless. It was a stark, almost violent portrayal of a woman breaking free, shards of her past scattered around her. Yet her face was turned upwards, fierce and resolute. For the first time I felt nothing looking at him, no hatred, no sorrow. Just a sense of finality, a calm acceptance. As he left the gallery, our eyes met for a brief, silent moment. There was nothing to say. My work had spoken for me. Every brushstroke and chisel mark a testament to the grief, anger, and finally the peace I had found. The gallery's doors closed behind him, and in that moment, I felt lighter than I had in years. The exhibition continued for another month, garnering more attention, stirring conversations about love, betrayal, and the resilience of the human heart. My story had become a part of others' lives. My pain transformed into a shared experience that connected me to people I'd never met. In the end, my revenge had not been about him at all. It had been a way to reclaim myself, to find beauty and strength in what was broken. Through my art I had let go, and that was the truest victory I could ever hope for. As the exhibition drew to a close, I was asked to extend it due to the overwhelming response. People were flocking in not just from Berlin but from other cities across Europe. The gallery director seemed thrilled, constantly sending me messages with links to articles written about the collection. The coverage was extensive, with art critics analyzing every piece, journalists publishing stories of an artist's revenge, and fans posting reflections on social media about their own journeys with heartbreak and betrayal. There were dozens of photographs of visitors standing in front of Prelude to Ruin or Erosion, often with quiet, reflective expressions, their faces caught in moments of vulnerability. People felt seen, understood. And that surprised me. My private pain had somehow become universal. Every day, I'd receive letters from strangers, some emailed, others handwritten, pouring out their stories of love lost and betrayal endured. I couldn't read them all. It was too overwhelming, each story pulling me back into my own memories, sometimes leaving me feeling raw all over again. Yet, there was something about knowing that my story had helped others feel less alone that kept me going. My pain had turned into something much larger, a shared catharsis that rippled out into the world, touching lives I'd never imagined reaching. The final week of the exhibition was announced as a kind of closing ceremony. People crowded the gallery even more in those last few days, creating a packed electric atmosphere. On the last night, I arrived early, hoping to spend a few final private moments with my work. I walked through the space slowly, revisiting each piece as if seeing it for the first time. I thought of the hours I had poured into each one, the nights spent sculpting or painting as a way to escape the weight of my own sorrow. Standing before Closure, I took a deep breath. This was the piece that had defined my journey out of heartbreak, my way of saying goodbye not just to him but to the old version of myself, the version who had once been so consumed by our love that she hadn't seen the warning signs. Looking at it now, I saw a new strength in the woman I had painted, her resolve burning through the canvas. I felt proud. Somehow I had made it through. Lost in thought, I barely noticed the growing crowd until someone gently touched my arm. I turned, startled, and found myself face to face with a woman who looked about my age. She held out a hand, introducing herself as Maria. Her English was slightly accented, and she explained that she was a journalist from Spain. "I wanted to meet you," she said, her voice soft but filled with intensity. "Your work, it resonates. It's like you were speaking my own story. I was in a relationship for 10 years, and when it ended I felt destroyed, like there was nothing left of me. But seeing this, it makes me feel understood." Her words lingered with me as I spoke with others that night, each of them drawn to the art for reasons that connected in some way to my own. Some were artists themselves, finding inspiration in my willingness to bare my soul. Others were simply individuals who had gone through their own heartbreak, seeking a place to process their grief. Each conversation was like a piece of the puzzle that I hadn't realized I needed. A reminder that, in this space, none of us were alone. The real surprise, though, came towards the end of the night. I was about to step outside for some fresh air when the gallery director approached me, looking uncharacteristically excited. "There's someone here who'd like to meet you," he said, motioning toward a small group gathered near Erosion. A woman stepped forward, someone I recognized from countless magazine covers and art documentaries. A renowned curator from New York who had influenced the careers of some of the world's most celebrated artists. She introduced herself with a warm smile, her eyes sharp and assessing as she glanced around at my work. "I've heard a lot about this exhibition," she said, her voice smooth and practiced, yet sincere. "I knew I had to see it before it closed." She paused, looking around the gallery, before her gaze settled back on me. "Your work is powerful. I don't think I've seen anything quite like this. I'm planning a new exhibition back in New York, and I would love to feature you. If you're interested, I think your work would resonate there too." I could hardly believe what she was saying. New York had always been a distant dream, a place I'd hoped to one day visit as an artist, but never thought I'd be invited to exhibit my work there. Her words felt surreal, like a lifeline into an entirely new world, and for a moment, I was overwhelmed by the weight of it. I managed to thank her, my voice steady, even as my hands trembled slightly with excitement. Over the next few days, the curator and I discussed plans for the exhibition. She wanted to expand the collection, to create a more complete narrative for the New York audience. She asked if I could create a few additional pieces to round out the story, something that would show what came after the pain, after the revenge, after the closure. It was an idea that struck me deeply. I realized that I had been so focused on purging the hurt that I hadn't considered what might come next. What did healing look like? What would it mean to move forward? Not just in defiance of the past, but in search of new joy, new inspiration. The next months were a whirlwind. I returned to my studio, diving into a new creative process that felt lighter, more hopeful. I wanted to show not just the hurt but the resilience, the beauty that could bloom from the ashes. Piece by piece, I began to explore themes of rebirth, of rediscovering oneself, of finding strength in vulnerability. My work took on a new softness, and though I could still feel traces of the old pain, they were now woven into something larger, a new story that spoke of survival and growth. Finally, the day came for the New York exhibition. As I walked through the gallery, seeing my journey displayed on walls thousands of miles from where it had begun, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't anticipated. Here, in this new city, my work had taken on a life of its own, connecting with people in ways I could never have predicted. Visitors wandered through, each finding something personal in the pieces, some of them wiping away tears, others smiling with quiet understanding. The exhibition ran for weeks, sparking conversations across the city. I received invitations to collaborate, requests for interviews, and messages from people all over the world who had seen photos of the collection online. It was as though my pain had become a bridge, connecting me with others who had also struggled and survived. In those final days, standing amid the work that had once held so much anguish, I felt something entirely new, a sense of freedom, of weightlessness. The betrayal that had once shattered me had become the very thing that set me free. In the end, my art had been my revenge, but it had also been my salvation. I had taken back control of my story, my heart, and my future. And now, as I looked out over the bustling streets of New York, I knew that I was ready to start again. Not as the woman I had once been, but as the artist I had become. Months passed, and the New York exhibition continued to ripple through the art world, bringing in audiences beyond anything I had ever imagined. My work was no longer just a visual exploration of betrayal. It had become a symbol, a testament to resilience and rebirth. Critics praised the raw honesty of the pieces, calling them an artistic reckoning and a manifesto of survival. Galleries from Paris, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo began reaching out, inviting me to exhibit internationally, and I found myself swept up in an entirely new life, one that seemed to grow from the ashes of my old one. One evening at a gallery event in Manhattan celebrating the exhibition's success, I found myself lost in conversation with other artists, each with their own stories of struggle and creative triumph. I was in the middle of a conversation about collaboration opportunities when I noticed a man standing at the edge of the room, looking intently at me. At first, I thought he was simply another visitor, but something about his gaze felt familiar. It was then that I realized it was him. Him, the man whose betrayal had ignited this entire journey. He approached me slowly and I braced myself, unsure of what he could possibly say. Seeing him in the flesh, here in New York so far from where our story had begun, felt surreal. Part of me had thought he would fade from my life, disappear into the past like a character in a story that had already reached its conclusion. But here he was, real and present, a reminder of the beginning of it all. We exchanged a few awkward pleasantries, and he congratulated me on my success, his voice tinged with a mixture of admiration and something else I couldn't quite place, regret, perhaps? Or maybe it was the weight of realizing that he had become nothing more than a shadow in someone else's story. "I saw your work in Berlin," he said quietly, his eyes drifting to the pieces now lining the walls of this new gallery space. "And again here. I didn't know. I didn't expect it to become this." His words faltered, and for a moment he looked lost, as if he was seeing everything, our entire relationship, his betrayal, my transformation, in a completely new light. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds, the silence heavy between us. Finally he broke it, his voice barely above a whisper. "You turned it all into something beautiful. I never thought," he trailed off, the words hanging in the air. He seemed to struggle with himself, as if he wanted to apologize but couldn't find the right way to convey everything he felt. I looked at him, feeling an odd sense of calm wash over me. I realized then that I didn't need an apology, didn't need any closure from him. I had found it within myself, through my art, through the community I had connected with. He was a part of my past, yes, but he no longer had a hold over my present, or my future. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice steady, "for being honest, for showing me who you were, even if it hurt. Without it, I wouldn't have found this." I gestured to the gallery around us, to the life I had built from the broken pieces of our relationship. His eyes softened, a flicker of understanding passing over his face. He nodded, seemingly at peace with his own small role in my journey, and after a few more quiet words he left, disappearing into the crowd. When he was gone, I felt a sense of closure so profound that it settled in my chest like a warm ember. For the first time I was free, not because of revenge or vindication, but because I had finally reclaimed my story. I was more than the woman he had hurt. I was an artist, a creator, a woman with a future that held possibilities I couldn't have dreamed of before. Over the next year, my career continued to blossom. I traveled to cities I had only seen in photographs, met artists whose work had inspired me for years, and even began teaching workshops, helping others channel their own emotions into art. With each new project, I found myself less tethered to the past, more focused on the future. I experimented with new mediums, new themes, pushing myself beyond the limits I had once known. In Tokyo, I created a series of paintings that explored the concept of transformation, focusing on the cycles of nature and the idea of growth through adversity. In Paris, I collaborated with a photographer on a project that captured people in moments of vulnerability and strength, telling stories of resilience from different cultures and backgrounds. Everywhere I went, I found people who had been through their own journeys of heartbreak and healing, and I realized just how universal our experiences were, how deeply they connected us. And then one night in Paris, as I stood on a rooftop terrace overlooking the city lights, I met someone new. He was kind, thoughtful, with an artist's soul and an empathy that ran deep. We talked for hours that night, sharing stories of art, love, and the unpredictable paths our lives had taken. There was a quiet understanding between us, an unspoken recognition of two people who had both been broken once and had chosen to rebuild. Our connection grew slowly, carefully, each of us respecting the other's boundaries and past. For the first time since my marriage, I felt the stirrings of a new beginning, something that wasn't defined by the pain of the past, but by the hope of the present. This relationship wasn't the consuming, all-encompassing passion I had once known. Instead, it was steady, comforting, like the gentle warmth of sunrise after a long, dark night. Months turned into a year, and as we traveled together, I found myself painting with a new kind of joy, one that wasn't tied to anger or sadness, but to gratitude for the journey I had taken, for the strength I had discovered within myself, and for the life I had created out of the ashes of what once was. My art evolved, reflecting the lightness I felt, the peace that had replaced the anguish. One day, while working on a new piece in my studio, I realized that I hadn't thought of my ex-husband in months. The memories were still there, of course, but they felt distant, like shadows from another life, a story that had ended long ago. I smiled, feeling a quiet pride in how far I had come. I was no longer defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by what I had created, by the love and resilience I had found within myself. Years later, at a retrospective of my work in New York, I walked through the gallery, revisiting each piece that had once held so much pain and transformation. People stopped to ask questions, to share their own experiences, and I realized that my story had become a part of theirs, that our journeys of healing had intertwined. As I left the gallery that night, hand in hand with the man who had become my partner, my confidant, and my greatest supporter, I looked back one last time, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. My art had not only set me free, it had given me a life richer and more beautiful than I had ever dreamed. In the end, revenge had been only a beginning. The true masterpiece was the life I had created. One built not on bitterness, but on love, strength, and the courage to move forward. And that, I realized, was the greatest triumph of all. As the years went by, my career continued to blossom in ways I never could have predicted. The retrospective in New York had marked a pivotal moment, a culmination of everything I had built from the wreckage of my past. And yet, somehow, it also felt like a beginning. The show received glowing reviews, with critics calling it a deeply moving exploration of the human spirit, and I was invited to speak at universities, art forums, and conferences around the world. I threw myself into new projects, each one more ambitious than the last. No longer bound by the need to express pain, I found myself exploring themes that resonated with the different stages of my life and the journeys I had witnessed in others. I became fascinated by the idea of regeneration, how beauty could emerge from darkness, how even the most broken pieces could be reshaped into something new, something meaningful. One such project took me to Florence, where I spent 6 months working with a group of artists to restore a crumbling 16th-century fresco in a church. There, amidst ancient stones and faded pigments, I learned the delicate art of restoration, of breathing new life into something time-worn without erasing its history. It was painstaking work, each brushstroke requiring patience and precision, but it taught me an invaluable lesson. Not all broken things need to be discarded. Some could be transformed, respected, and even cherished for their imperfections. In that quiet, sun-drenched studio, surrounded by centuries-old beauty and the soft murmur of Italian voices, I found a sense of peace unlike any I had known before. I wasn't running from my past or fighting to prove myself. I was simply creating, connecting to something timeless and universal. Art, I realized, had become my sanctuary, a place where I could be wholly myself, flawed, resilient, and ever-evolving. Around this time, my relationship with my partner deepened as well. We had built a life that felt steady and genuine, rooted in mutual respect and understanding. Unlike my first marriage, which had been defined by intensity and eventual betrayal, this love was quiet, unassuming, and deeply grounding. We supported each other's creative pursuits, respecting the spaces we each needed to grow. He traveled with me when he could, sharing in my excitement for each new project. And when work took us in different directions, we stayed connected through long letters and late-night calls. One summer, while working on a series inspired by the landscapes of the American Southwest, I stumbled upon a piece of land just outside of Santa Fe. It was rugged and expansive, with sweeping views of red mesas and endless skies, and something about it spoke to me. It felt like a place of new beginnings, a blank canvas. Without hesitation, I bought the land and began plans to build a studio there. A place I could retreat to, away from the demands of the art world, where I could experiment freely and reconnect with the raw power of nature. Building the studio was a labor of love, a slow and thoughtful process that allowed me to pour my vision into every detail. I wanted the space to reflect not just my artistic journey, but my journey as a person. The main room was bathed in natural light, with large windows overlooking the desert, and I filled it with plants, sculptures, and artifacts collected from my travels. It was both a sanctuary and a workspace, a place where I could lose myself in the creative process without distraction. Once the studio was complete, I began to host small workshops and retreats for artists from around the world. People came to Santa Fe seeking inspiration, healing, and a break from their routines, and I found immense joy in guiding them, sharing my techniques, and watching them rediscover their own creative sparks. It became a place where artists could shed their inhibitions, experiment without fear, and leave behind whatever weighed them down. In many ways, I felt like I was giving back the gift that art had given me. One evening, as I was cleaning up after a workshop, a young woman lingered in the studio, her gaze fixed on a large canvas I had been working on. She introduced herself as Emily and explained that she had come to the retreat after the end of a long, painful relationship. There was a quiet vulnerability in her voice, a trace of the sadness I had once known so well. "Your work," she said softly, her eyes scanning the canvas. "It feels like it understands, like someone else has been through it and made it out the other side." I looked at her, feeling a pang of recognition. I knew what it was like to feel lost, to wonder if you'd ever heal, if you could ever find beauty again in a world that seemed dimmed by betrayal. We spoke for a long time that night, and as she shared her story, I felt grateful that my journey could offer even a glimmer of hope to someone else. It reminded me of why I had started creating in the first place, of the power art held to connect, to heal, to transform. As the years went by, the studio in Santa Fe became my anchor. I spent my summers there, hosting retreats and working on my own projects, while the rest of the year was filled with exhibitions and collaborations across the globe. I explored new mediums, blending sculpture with digital art, experimenting with installations that incorporated sound and light, and pushing the boundaries of what I had once thought art could be. My work had become a fusion of past and present, a celebration of growth, resilience, and the beauty that could be found even in the broken places. One day, a curator approached me with an idea for a retrospective that would span the full scope of my career, from those first raw pieces born out of betrayal to the works that had come to define my life afterward. The exhibition would be held in a grand museum in London, an honor that felt both exhilarating and humbling. I agreed, and over the following months, I worked closely with the curator, selecting pieces that told the story of my journey in a way that felt true and complete. When the exhibition finally opened, I was taken aback by the response. People filled the gallery, moving slowly through each room, pausing before the pieces that marked the different chapters of my life. They lingered in front of Prelude to Ruin and Erosion, the works that had once held my heartache, but they also stopped at the more recent pieces, paintings and sculptures that radiated a sense of peace, hope, and renewal. It was as if they were walking alongside me, witnessing the evolution of a woman who had turned her pain into art, her heartbreak into beauty. Standing in the final room of the exhibition, surrounded by the culmination of my life's work, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. My art had been born from a place of darkness, but it had led me to a life more fulfilling than I could have ever imagined. The pain that had once threatened to consume me had become a source of strength, a reminder that even the most shattered heart could rebuild itself, could create something that touched the lives of others. As the exhibition closed, I knew that this was not an ending but a continuation. There would always be new projects, new landscapes to explore, new stories to tell. And as I returned to my studio in Santa Fe, standing once again in that quiet sunlit space, I felt ready to begin anew, to create without limits, knowing that my journey and my art would forever be intertwined. Back in Santa Fe, life settled into a gentle rhythm. My days were filled with the quiet joy of creation, the thrill of experimentation, and the simple pleasure of working with my hands. There, surrounded by the vastness of the desert, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The landscape itself became a source of endless inspiration. The shifting hues of the mountains at sunrise, the soft rustling of sagebrush in the wind, the fiery brilliance of the sky at dusk. Nature's resilience, its ability to renew itself, mirrored my own journey. Each day, I felt more and more at home in the world I had built for myself. One afternoon, as I was preparing for a new workshop, I received a letter from the museum in London that had hosted my retrospective. They had included a few photographs of visitors moving through the exhibition, standing before pieces that represented different stages of my life. There was one photo in particular that caught my attention. A little girl, no older than 7 or 8, gazing up at closure, her face illuminated with wonder. The image struck me deeply. I saw in her expression a quiet understanding, as if even at her young age, she sensed the depth of emotion embedded in the piece. It reminded me that art could reach people of all ages and backgrounds, crossing boundaries I hadn't imagined. The letter went on to mention that, inspired by the success of my retrospective, the museum was launching an outreach program for young, aspiring artists. They wanted me to be involved as a mentor, to help guide a new generation in finding their own voices, in transforming their emotions into something tangible and meaningful. The invitation filled me with a mix of excitement and a slight pang of nostalgia. I remembered myself at that age, full of passion but without the life experience that would one day shape my art. I felt a sense of responsibility and a new purpose. The following summer, I traveled back to London to begin my work with the program. My role was to lead a series of workshops with young artists, most of whom came from challenging backgrounds. Many of them had experienced hardship, loss, and even betrayal, though they were still so young. They arrived at the studio each day, a mix of eagerness and hesitation in their eyes, carrying sketchbooks and canvases, pencils and brushes. Some were silent, their walls firmly up, while others shared their stories openly, seeking connection and validation. I recognized so much of my younger self in them. The uncertainty, the desire to be seen, and the overwhelming need to pour everything onto the page or canvas. In our sessions we explored techniques and styles, but more importantly we explored emotions. I encouraged them to paint not what they thought others wanted to see, but what they felt, to let the work speak for itself, no matter how raw or unrefined. Slowly, the room came alive with color, movement, and expression. Each brushstroke was a release, a way for them to process feelings that words could never capture. One student, a 16-year-old girl named Lucy, stood out to me. She had a quiet, contemplative nature and rarely spoke, but her work was vivid, almost haunting. She painted scenes of tangled landscapes, hidden figures emerging from shadows, and skies that seemed to hold storms within them. Watching her work, I was reminded of the intensity I'd felt as a young artist. The way art had been my sanctuary, my only way to make sense of the world. Over time, Lucy began to open up, sharing bits and pieces of her life with me. She told me about her family, the struggles they had faced, and the isolation she felt. Art, she said, was her way of escaping, of finding beauty in a world that often seemed bleak. Our connection grew as the program continued, and soon she started asking me questions about my own journey. I shared parts of my story, careful to keep it honest yet hopeful, emphasizing that the pain I had felt had eventually become a source of strength. Art is a way to transform what's inside of you, I told her one day. Even the hardest parts. Especially the hardest parts. She nodded, her eyes thoughtful, as if she was beginning to understand that her pain, too, could be turned into something powerful, something lasting. By the end of the program, each student had created a piece to showcase in a small exhibition. It was a modest event, held in a corner of the museum, but to them it was monumental. Families and friends gathered, marveling at the works their loved ones had created. The young artists stood beside their pieces, some shy, others beaming with pride, and I felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. I realized that this too was a part of my journey, giving back, sharing what I had learned with those who might one day walk a similar path. The exhibition marked a turning point for Lucy. Her painting, a swirling mix of dark colors, with a single bright figure emerging from the shadows, was the highlight of the show. Visitors were drawn to it, their gazes lingering, captivated by the rawness, the beauty of the piece. Watching her accept their praise, her face glowing with a quiet confidence, I felt a surge of pride. She had taken her pain and made it beautiful. In that moment, I saw the beginning of a new journey for her. One that would be defined not by her struggles but by her strength, her resilience, and her voice as an artist. When the program ended, I returned to Santa Fe, my heart full and my mind brimming with new ideas. I felt inspired by these young artists, by their courage and their willingness to confront their emotions. I realized that teaching had awakened something in me, a desire to continue sharing, to create spaces where others could explore their own creativity without judgment. I began to think about establishing a permanent residency program at my studio, a place where artists of all ages and backgrounds could come to find solace, inspiration, and support. The residency program became my new focus. I reached out to fellow artists, inviting them to come and teach, to share their own experiences with the next generation. We created a community, a place where people could connect, learn, and grow together. Artists came from all over the world, each bringing their unique perspective, and in the desert landscape of Santa Fe, they found the freedom to experiment, to push boundaries, to heal. Years passed, and the studio became a sanctuary not just for the artists who visited, but for me as well. I continued to create, my work evolving with each new experience, each person I met. My life felt full, rich with purpose, and I no longer felt the shadow of my past lingering behind me. Instead, it was a part of me, a chapter that had led me here, to a life defined not by pain but by resilience, by creation, by connection. One evening, as I sat outside watching the sun set over the mesas, I felt a sense of profound peace wash over me. My journey had taken me through heartbreak, loss, renewal, and growth, and now, sitting there under the vast New Mexico sky, I knew that I had finally come home. To myself, to my art, and to a life that was entirely beautifully my own. And with that, I felt the pages of my story finally close, not with an ending, but with an open horizon. A horizon that promised new beginnings, new challenges, and endless possibilities for creation, love, and discovery. As the studio residency flourished, it became a true haven for creative souls, drawing artists from all over who came seeking not just inspiration but a chance to reconnect with themselves. The residency program expanded over the years, attracting writers, musicians, photographers, and even dancers. Each discipline brought a new rhythm, a unique energy, and the once quiet studio in Santa Fe became a vibrant center for collaboration and expression. One fall, a group of writers joined us for a month-long workshop, and their late-night conversations filled the studio with a rich, almost musical hum. We would gather by the fire in the evenings, sharing stories of our creative journeys, our personal struggles, and the moments of insight that had brought us closer to ourselves. There was an openness in these conversations, a raw honesty that connected us all. People shared secrets, hurts, dreams, and triumphs in a way that felt safe, as if we had all found a family of kindred spirits in this desert oasis. During that time, I became particularly close with a writer named Daniel. He was soft-spoken, thoughtful, and had a presence that seemed to ground those around him. His writing explored the small, intimate moments of life, the quiet acts of kindness, the struggles to overcome self-doubt, the way love could evolve and deepen over time. I found myself drawn to his perspective, and we spent hours discussing everything from the creative process to our hopes and fears. There was an understanding between us, a sense of shared purpose. Like me, he had found healing through his art, and he saw writing as a way to make sense of the world, to bring beauty to even the most challenging parts of life. One evening, as the workshop was winding down, he invited me to sit with him outside on a small hill overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, casting the landscape in a warm golden glow, and the sky was streaked with deep shades of pink and violet. We sat in comfortable silence, watching as the day gave way to twilight, both of us lost in thought. Finally, he turned to me and said, "Do you ever think about what it all means? The journeys we take, the people we meet, the things we create." I looked at him, feeling the weight of his question settle over me. "I think about it all the time," I replied softly. "I think that maybe we're all just trying to make something lasting, something beautiful, so that even the painful moments have a purpose. Art, whatever form it takes, helps us transform what's inside, helps us find a sense of meaning in the chaos." He nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "It's strange, isn't it? How the things that once hurt us the most can become the very things that set us free." There was a quiet wisdom in his words, a calm acceptance that resonated deeply with me. That night, we talked until the stars appeared, our voices mingling with the sounds of the desert night. It felt like a moment suspended in time, a rare space where everything felt aligned, as if all the twists and turns of our lives had brought us to this exact place, this exact conversation. For the first time in a long time, I felt the stirrings of something deeper, a connection that went beyond friendship or mutual understanding. But it was quiet, unhurried, something that felt like it was meant to grow slowly, if at all. When the writers left the residency, Daniel and I stayed in touch, our correspondence taking on a life of its own. We exchanged letters, sharing updates on our work, snippets of new projects, thoughts on art, life, and the simple pleasures of everyday moments. His words became a source of comfort and inspiration, A reminder that creativity was not just a solitary pursuit, but something that could be enriched through connection. Years passed, and our lives grew intertwined in ways neither of us had planned. He visited Santa Fe often, becoming a part of the residency's community, and eventually, he moved into a small house not far from the studio. Our friendship blossomed into a quiet, steady love. A love that felt like coming home. There were no grand gestures, no intense declarations, just a deep, unwavering respect and understanding. It was a love built on shared purpose, on late-night conversations, on the gentle rhythms of two people who had each walked their own paths and found themselves in the same place. With Daniel by my side, the residency continued to grow. Together, we began to create more formal programs, bringing in guest artists, hosting community events, and organizing exhibitions that showcased the work created by our residents. We invited local students to attend workshops for free, reaching out to young people in the area who might not have otherwise had access to artistic resources. Our goal was simple: to foster creativity, connection, and healing for anyone who walked through our doors. One winter, we decided to host an exhibition featuring works from all the residents who had come through our program over the years. It was a massive undertaking, and as we organized the pieces, hung paintings, and arranged sculptures, I felt a sense of pride and gratitude. Each piece told a story, a testament to the journeys these artists had taken, the emotions they had poured into their work. The exhibition was held in a refurbished barn on the studio grounds, and on opening night, the space was filled with artists, friends, neighbors, and members of the community. As I moved through the crowd, listening to people's reactions, watching them connect with the work, I realized that this, more than any solo exhibition, any retrospective, was the legacy I wanted to leave. This space, these connections, this community we had built, felt like the truest expression of everything I had once dreamed of as a young artist. It was a place where people could come to heal, to grow, to create, and to feel seen. That night, as the last guest trickled out and the barn grew quiet, Daniel and I sat together, reflecting on everything we had built. He took my hand and we sat in silence, content in the knowledge that our work had made a difference, that our lives had been woven into something larger than ourselves. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace, a realization that I had found my purpose, not just as an artist but as a person. My journey had led me to a life defined by love, by resilience, and by a commitment to help others find their own voices. The next day, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I walked through the studio alone, feeling the stillness, the energy left behind by all those who had come through this space. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter, of late-night conversations, of whispered dreams and shared hopes. And I knew that long after I was gone, this place would continue to carry forward the spirit of everything we had built. A legacy of healing, of art, and of connection. As I looked out over the desert landscape, the sun rising over the mesas, I felt a sense of profound gratitude. Life had brought me full circle, taking me from heartbreak to healing, from revenge to purpose, from isolation to community. My art had given me a path, but it was the people, the connections, and the lives we had touched that had given it meaning. In the end, it wasn't just about the art. It was about the journey, the growth, and the beautiful, unpredictable tapestry of life that I had woven one brushstroke, one conversation, one moment at a time. And as I stood there, watching the world awaken around me, I felt ready for whatever came next, knowing that my story and my art would continue, in one form or another, forever intertwined with the lives of those who had walked this path with me. As time moved forward, the studio in Santa Fe became more than just an artist residency. It became a destination, a place people spoke about with reverence, where creativity and healing blended seamlessly. Word of our little sanctuary spread beyond the art community, drawing people from all walks of life who sought a refuge, a place to reconnect with themselves and the world around them. Journalists began to write about our unique approach, sharing stories of people who had arrived feeling broken or uncertain, and left with renewed purpose and direction. The residency became known not only for its art, but for the life-changing experiences that unfolded within its walls. Each season brought new faces, new stories, and new projects, and each artist left behind a piece of themselves. A mural on the wall, a sculpture in the garden, or a poem carved carefully into wood. Over the years, the studio grounds transformed into a living gallery, a sprawling, ever-evolving canvas that reflected the hundreds of voices that had passed through. We planted wildflowers around the property, and as they bloomed each spring, the studio seemed to come alive, vibrant with color and life, a symbol of renewal. One of the most memorable projects took place during a spring residency that had a theme focused on nature and resilience. A sculptor named Anna, who had survived a serious illness, arrived with an idea for a community installation. She proposed creating a garden of renewal, where each resident would contribute a sculpture or artwork inspired by their journey of healing. The sculptures would be placed in a circular arrangement, a place for meditation and reflection where future residents and visitors could wander and find peace. The project brought everyone together in a way I hadn't anticipated. Each artist created something uniquely personal, pouring their stories into their work. There were bronze leaves sculpted with intricate veins to represent endurance, stone pillars engraved with words of wisdom, and ceramic birds with cracked but gilded wings, symbolizing the beauty of mended scars. At the center of the garden, Anna placed a simple, weathered bench she had carved herself, inviting others to sit and reflect on their own journeys. It was a stunning, powerful piece, and when it was finished, the Garden of Renewal felt like a sacred space. Over time, the garden became a gathering place not only for residents but for the community as well. Local families would visit on weekends, sitting quietly on the benches, children running between the sculptures, curious and wide-eyed. People would leave small notes and flowers, tokens of gratitude or hope, as if they too were a part of this ever-growing testament to resilience. The garden became a place of remembrance, healing, and connection, a living embodiment of everything the residency stood for. As the residency expanded, we established a foundation to support artists who couldn't afford the costs, ensuring that our programs remained accessible. With Daniel's guidance, we created partnerships with local schools, offering art classes for young people who had limited exposure to the arts. Seeing the joy on the faces of those young students as they dipped their brushes into paint for the first time, as they watched colors come alive under their fingertips, it was a reminder of the simple, transformative power of creativity. One day, a local high school teacher brought her class to visit the studio. Among the students was a shy girl named Marisol, who lingered after the group had moved on, staring at a series of paintings displayed in one of the side rooms. I approached her, sensing her hesitation, and she looked up, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "I've never seen anything like this," she whispered, gesturing to the abstract swirls of color and texture on the canvas. "It's like, I can feel it. The painting, it speaks." Her words struck me. I remembered the first time I had felt that way. The first time a piece of art had reached inside me and pulled something to the surface I hadn't known was there. "That's the beauty of art," I told her, smiling. "Sometimes it understands us better than we understand ourselves." Marisol became one of the residency's youngest scholarship recipients, and watching her find her voice over the years was like witnessing a version of my younger self. Her talent blossomed, her paintings capturing an emotional depth well beyond her years. Eventually, she held her own exhibition at the studio, attended by her family, friends, and teachers. It was a full-circle moment, a reminder of why we had created this place, and I knew that the residency would continue to be a home for young artists like her, long after I was gone. As the residency continued to grow, so did my relationship with Daniel. In the quiet of our days and nights together, our lives intertwined with an ease and gentleness that felt as natural as breathing. He became not only my partner but my confidant, my anchor, someone who understood my journey on a soul-deep level. Together we made plans for the future of the residency, discussing ways to expand its reach, to offer more opportunities for underrepresented voices, to ensure that it remained a place of inclusivity and belonging. On our 10th anniversary together, Daniel surprised me with a simple ceremony in the garden, just as the wildflowers were beginning to bloom. Friends, family, and residents gathered to celebrate with us, and as we exchanged vows, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us here. Our love, like the art that surrounded us, had been built slowly, carefully, and with intention. It was a love rooted in mutual respect, in shared dreams, in the quiet understanding that comes from two people who have faced their own shadows and found light within them. As the years turned to decades, the residency became our legacy. We published a book documenting the lives and works of the artists who had passed through our doors, sharing their stories with a wider audience. It became a testament to resilience, a collection of voices that spoke of courage, hope, and transformation. The book was filled with images of the Garden of Renewal, photographs of students at their easels, candid shots of artists in mid-creation, their faces alight with inspiration. It was a love letter to everyone who had been a part of our journey. Eventually, Daniel and I grew older, and we knew it was time to pass the torch. We worked with the board of directors to ensure that the residency would continue to thrive, to remain a sanctuary for future generations. We selected a team of passionate individuals, former residents, artists, and educators, to carry forward the mission we had built. They understood the importance of what we had created, the delicate balance of art and healing, and we left knowing the residency was in capable hands. On our final evening at the studio, Daniel and I walked through the Garden of Renewal one last time. The sculptures were weathered now, softened by years of sun and wind, each one bearing the marks of time, but they were more beautiful than ever. The garden had become a place of memory, layered with stories, and as we stood there, I felt the weight of all those lives, all those moments surrounding us. We walked back to the house hand in hand, the sky a deep, endless blue, the first stars beginning to appear. It was a quiet, unassuming goodbye, but it was perfect. This place, this life had been more than I could have ever dreamed, a journey that had turned my pain into purpose, my heartbreak into a legacy that would live on. As we left Santa Fe, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that our story, our art, and our love had become something larger than ourselves. It would carry forward in the lives of everyone who had been touched by the residency, in every brushstroke and sculpture, in every note of music and every line of poetry created there. We had built a sanctuary for art, a refuge for healing, and in the end we had found a home, not just in a place, but in each other, and in the lives of those we had come to know and love. The road ahead was open, stretching into the unknown, but I felt ready for whatever lay beyond, content in the knowledge that our story would continue in the hands of others, woven into the beautiful, endless tapestry of art and life.